The Wright brothers' first flight, 1903. Orville and Wilbur Wright kept a bicycle sales and repair shop on West 3rd Street in Dayton, Ohio. Bicycles taught them balance, bearings, chain drives, and the value of strong, light frames. They trued wheels, brazed joints, and built their own models. Precision was daily work. In the evenings they read everything they could find about gliders and air currents. They studied Otto Lilienthal's data and photographs of his German hill flights. They read Octave Chanut's thoughtful survey of the field. They followed reports on kites with box frames and on steam or gasoline-powered experiments that had not yet solved control. Their view sharpened. Many people talked about power, but few understood control. Their first problem was not the motor. It was how to steer. In the air, a craft must be guided in 3 motions: roll, pitch, and yaw. The brothers set a simple goal: a machine the pilot could truly control in all 3 axes. For roll, they proposed wing warping, twisting the wing tips in opposite directions to increase lift on one side and decrease it on the other. For pitch, they planned a movable front elevator that could raise or lower the nose. For yaw, they added a rear rudder. They also understood how the motions interact. A roll produces adverse yaw, so the rudder should swing with the roll and keep the nose pointed into the turn. They needed a test site with smooth wind and soft landings. They wrote to the U.S. Weather Bureau and compared wind records from many stations. Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, stood out: steady winds, tall dunes, soft sand, and a nearby U.S. life-saving station in case of trouble. In 1900 they created a small glider and camping gear, shipped it by train and boat, and traveled the last miles over sand by wagon. They built a simple camp of canvas and went on a low hill near Kill Devil Hills. The sea air tasted of salt, and the wind hummed through the guy wires like a low note on a violin. The 1900 glider was modest, about 17 feet of wingspan and a thin cambered wing based on Lilienthal's tables. The pilot lay prone on the lower wing to reduce drag. There was no engine. In strong wind they first flew it as a kite, anchored by ropes, and practiced moving the elevator and warping the wings while the craft lifted in place. Then, in calmer air, they took running launches down the sand and felt brief, silent hops. The machine responded, but the lift was weaker than expected. They took careful notes, packed the fabric, and returned to Dayton for the winter, puzzled but not discouraged. In 1901 they went back with a larger glider, about 22 feet of span and deeper camber. It should have flown better. Instead it stalled often and felt unstable. The lifts still did not match the numbers in the books. The brothers had reached the limit of trusting other people's tables. Wilbur gave a talk in Chicago, gently but firmly warning that if everyone trusted the old data, humans might wait 1,000 years for reliable flight. He was not being dramatic. He had seen with his own hands that the tables were wrong. Back in Dayton they turned their bicycle shop into a small laboratory. They built a wooden wind tunnel about 3 feet long with a smooth nozzle and a glass window. Inside they installed 2 delicate balances of their own design to measure lift and drag. They cut and sanded dozens of small metal and wooden airfoils, flat, curved, narrow, wide, and tested them at different angles. They discovered that the accepted Smeaton coefficient, a factor used to estimate air pressure on a surface, had been set too high for their conditions. They adopted a lower value that made predictions match reality more closely. They wrote their own tables. They moved from guessing to measurement. Equipped with new data, they designed a better craft. In the fall of 1902, at the same dunes, they assembled a glider almost 32 feet across, with a forward elevator and twin rudders at the rear linked to the wing warping control. This machine was different. In steady wind they could circle along the face of a hill, then slip off the lift and land softly. They made hundreds of glides, sometimes in conditions that would keep modern pilots on the ground. When the nose rose too fast they eased the elevator forward. When a wing dropped they pressed the hip cradle and brought it back. They learned to couple rudder with warp to keep turns smooth. By season's end they had a true, controllable glider and a pilot's feel for the sky. Only then did they ask for power. An airplane that can be controlled can be driven by an engine. Car motors were too heavy. They asked their trusted mechanic, Charlie Taylor, To build an engine from scratch in the back room of the shop. Using aluminum for the crankcase to save weight, Taylor machined a simple 4-cylinder engine of roughly 4-inch bore and 4-inch stroke. It produced about 12 horsepower at a little over 1,000 revolutions per minute and weighed around 180 pounds. Fuel dripped by gravity, lubrication was by splash. It was crude by later standards, but it ran reliably and met the weight goal. Propellers were an even deeper problem. Many people imagined a propeller as a wood screw boring through air. The brothers saw it as a rotating wing. They applied their wind tunnel findings to design blades that twisted from hub to tip so each section met the air at the correct angle. Carved from laminated spruce and planed smoothed by hand, the matched pair was driven through chains and sprocket sets so the props turned in opposite directions, canceling torque. Tests suggested an efficiency near 2/3, remarkably high for a first design. The solution was elegant because it was based on data, not guesswork. The 1903 Flyer took shape on the sand and in their canvas hangar. It spanned about 40 feet with a chord a little over 6 feet, for a wing area near 510 square feet. Spruce and ash formed the structure, unbleached muslin covered the wings. The pilot lay prone on the lower wing beside the engine to lower drag. He worked a hip cradle to warp the wings and a hand lever for the elevator and rudder. Skids served as the landing gear. There were no wheels. For takeoff the brothers built a 60-foot wooden rail and a small-wheeled dolly that rolled under the skids. The rail guided the craft straight and let it reach flying speed without digging into the sand. December on the Outer Banks can be harsh. On December 14, 1903, with a calm break in the weather, Wilbur won a coin toss for the first powered attempt. The Flyer left the rail, pitched up too sharply, stalled, and settled back after about 3 seconds, bending a skid and spar. They repaired the damage and waited. On December 17 a steady, cold north wind blew 20 to 27 miles per hour. The sand was crusted with frost. 5 men from the nearby life-saving station, among them John T. Daniels, came to help and to witness. At 10:35 a.m., Orville lay on the wing, released the restraining wire for the elevator, and signaled. The engine chuffed and then steadied. The propellers blurred into 2 pale discs. Wilbur held a wingtip until the machine gathered speed on the rail. The Flyer rose, wavered, and then steadied as Orville made small pitch corrections. It flew about 120 feet at a height of roughly 10 feet and landed after 12 seconds. It was short and it was uneven, but it was sustained, controlled, and powered. Daniels, who had never used a camera before, pressed the shutter on a tripod and captured the clean, simple image that would represent the moment to the world. They carried the Flyer back to the rail and flew again. Wilbur's second attempt covered about 175 feet. Orville's third went near 200 feet. For the fourth, around noon, Wilbur took the controls and flew 852 feet in 59 seconds, making steady corrections as Gus tried to lift the nose. After that, a strong gust flipped the machine while they were moving it, tumbling it end over end and damaging it badly. No one was hurt, but the season was done. The brothers packed the broken craft and the precious engine for the trip home. News did not roar across the world. The brothers sent a short telegram to their father, "Success 4 flights Thursday morning." A local paper printed a confused version with errors in distance and altitude. Skeptics remained. The Wrights did not chase reporters. They returned to work. In 1904 and 1905 they built improved Flyers and tested them at Huffman Prairie, a rough field outside Dayton. Early attempts were frustrating. Without strong coastal wind, the machine struggled to get off the ground. They built a catapult, weight dropping from a tower to help the craft accelerate along the rail, and solve the problem. By late 1905 they were flying controlled circles and figure eights, staying aloft half an hour at a time, and landing where they chose. Patents and business followed. In 1906 the U.S. Patent Office issued Patent No. 821,393 for the Wright system of aerodynamic control, protecting their linked roll-yaw method. They sought contracts instead of applause. Legal disputes later arose when others used ailerons to gain the same effect without warping, and the brothers defended their claims in court. These fights were long and sometimes bitter, but they also pushed designers to focus on safe, practical control rather than stunts. Public demonstrations finally came in 1908 and 1909. Wilbur flew near Le Mans, France, making calm, precise turns that stunned European experts who had not seen such control. Orville flew at Fort Myer, Virginia, for the U.S. Army, setting endurance records before a propeller failure caused a crash that killed Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge and injured Orville badly. The loss was painful and reminded everyone that the new craft was serious, not a toy. Even so, orders arrived. The brothers formed companies, trained pilots, and delivered airplanes to the Army and to clients in Europe. The basic facts of 1903 stayed clear through all the business and travel. The 1903 Flyer was the first heavier-than-air machine to make a sustained, controlled, powered flight with a pilot aboard. It succeeded because the brothers solved control first, measured their own data in a wind tunnel, designed efficient propellers, and built a light engine only as powerful as needed. They chose a site with steady wind and soft sand. They learned from glides. They wrote down what worked and what failed. They were cautious but not timid, bold but never careless. Many people helped. Chanute gave steady encouragement and technical discussion. Lilienthal's tragic glides left both a warning and a trail of useful observations. The crew at the Kill Devil Hills life-saving station hauled the machine across sand and stood in the cold wind to help with launches. John T. Daniels not only took the photograph but also held wires with numb hands and later said the machine just seemed to lift right off. Charlie Taylor, who had never built an engine, made one with files, a drill press, and quiet judgment. Their father, Bishop Milton Wright, gave firm support. Their sister, Catherine, managed the shop when they were away and handled correspondence with steady skill. The place still matters. The wind at Kitty Hawk can be strong and clean in winter. The dunes shift, but the slope at Kill Devil Hills is much as it was in 1902 and 1903. Today, markers stand where the Flyer left the rail and where each of the 4 flights ended. Visitors walk the distances, 120 feet, 175, about 200, and 852, and feel how short and how long they are at the same time. To walk 120 feet is nothing. To fly it, when no one had truly done so before, is everything. There were disputes about credit. For years the Smithsonian Institution favored Samuel Langley's aerodrome, displaying a later modified version in a way that implied it had been capable of flight before the Wrights. Orville felt this was unjust. After Wilbur's early death in 1912, Orville kept the argument alive. In 1928 he loaned the 1903 Flyer to the Science Museum in London rather than to the Smithsonian. Only after the Smithsonian publicly corrected its account and acknowledged the Flyer's priority did Orville agree to bring it home. In 1948 the airplane went on display in Washington, D.C., where people still look up at its fabric and wood and see the quiet logic that changed the world. The technology the brothers proved changed quickly. Wing warping gave way to ailerons on many later designs. Forward elevators moved to the rear, improving pitch stability. Engines gained power for little weight. Metal replaced wood in many parts. But the core method remained: 3-axis control, data-driven airfoils, and propellers treated as rotating wings. The Wrights balances and coefficient tables were the first modern steps in aeronautical engineering. Students still learn from their logic: measure, compare, adjust, and measure again. It is useful to picture their measuring habits. They marked out distances with stakes and used a stopwatch to time each glide. They mounted a small anemometer to read airspeed and kept a notebook for wind, temperature, and results. When the 1901 glider disappointed, they did not blame the wind or luck, they asked the data what had gone wrong. When the 1902 glider worked, they did not declare victory, they made hundreds more flights to be sure the results were repeatable. Such patience is not dramatic, but it is the reason their airplane behaved the way the tables said it should. Camp life on the dunes was quiet and hard. They cooked on small stoves, ate simple meals of canned goods and bread, and repaired fabric by lamplight. In summer the mosquitoes were fierce, in winter the wind drove sand into every seam. Yet both brothers wrote home that they liked the place. The open land let them think. The steady wind let them test. The lifesavers were kind. When storms flattened their sheds, The men rebuilt and laughed at the way sand can move a building half a foot in one night. Small design details reveal their care. The hip cradle gave the pilot a way to warp the wings without taking hands off the elevator lever. The chain drive used crossed and uncrossed chains so the propellers counter-rotated and cancelled torque. The spruce spars were hollowed to save ounces. The muslin covering was shrunk drum-tight for smooth flow. Even the launch rail mattered. By guiding the skids and dolly, it allowed the flyer to reach flying speed without digging into soft sand. Each detail was simple by itself, but together they made a system that worked. After 1905, the Wright sought buyers and trained pilots. Public flights in 1909 over New York Harbor and in 1910 at air meets drew crowds. Other pioneers advanced the art at the same time: Glenn Curtiss in the United States, Louis Blériot in France, and many others, each adding new answers to old problems. Accidents were common. Procedures were written. Training methods improved. The fragile, twitchy craft of 1903 and 1905 gave way, year by year, to sturdier machines that carried mail, cameras, doctors, and travelers. Through all that change, the picture of December 17, 1903, remains clear. A small group stands on cold sand. A simple rail points into a north wind. A light craft climbs away, 10 feet above the beach, with a man lying on its lower wing and his brother running beside him. No parade, no band, no headlines. Just a brief, controlled rise and a careful return to Earth. That is what made the future possible. If you want a closing image, return to the bicycle shop late at night in 1902. Wood shavings curl on the floor around a small wind tunnel model. A lamp burns low. Wilbur checks a column of figures. Orville resets a balance and watches the pointer settle. A pencil taps twice on paper. Outside, Dayton is quiet. Inside, a habit of mind is forming: test, note, change, test again. That habit will carry them through cold wind and broken spars to the short flight that changes everything. And now return once more to the morning of December 17th. See frost on the sand, the tripod set for the camera, the lifesavers in heavy coats. Hear the engine catch, the chain clatter smooth, and the soft call between brothers. Watch the flyer slide, lift, and hold. Watch the small corrections: nose down, then up, wings level, until the skids touch sand again. The scene is plain, and that is why it feels close. The world changed because two people treated flight not as magic but as a problem to be solved with care. From that day, the horizon moved. Mail would someday cross mountains in hours. Weather could be mapped from above. Rescue teams could reach storms. People could visit one another across oceans. The Wrights did not promise any of that. They promised only what their notebook could prove. A person could rise in a powered machine, steer it, and land by choice. The rest followed, one measured step at a time. Let the account end where it began, in steady work. The shop floor is swept. Tools hang in order. The notebook lies open to a page with a date and numbers that still make sense. The dunes are quiet again. The wind is honest. If you close your eyes, you can hear the soft wash of a propeller and the crunch of boots in cold sand. Then you hear only the sea and the slow breath of winter air, while the first airplane waits in memory, light as a kite, exact in its parts, and strong enough to change the way we look at the sky forever.